Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Chungmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your co-host, John Lee, and today I'm joined by our junior news reporter, Joon Ha Park.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
All right, Joon Ha, you're becoming a regular fixture here on the Korea Pro podcast. We're loving it. All right, so big news in the literature sector, something that we very seldom ever talk about here in the Korea Pro podcast or in any of our printed editions. So, Joon Ha, can you tell us exactly what happened? Who is Kang and what did she get the prize for? Walk us through the whole thing, please.
Sure. So Kang, she won the Nobel Prize in Literature just last week, and she was originated from Gwangju. She's quite a critically acclaimed author. Her prize motivation, as written on the Nobel Prize laureate page, is for her intense poetic prose that confronts historical traumas and exposes the fragility of human life. She's written quite a number of books that record and also write fiction on the quite distressing events throughout South Korea's modern and contemporary history, namely the May 18th Gwangju Uprising, which is written and described in Human Acts. And also she's written a social commentary style book called The Vegetarian, which looks at kind of themes of feminism. And her most recent book, 작별하지 않는다, or Those We Do Not Part in English, that is called, it focuses on the April 3rd the April 3rd incident in Jeju, where the Syngman administration massacred quite a number of Jeju residents for
Accusing them of being communists.
Absolutely, yeah. And Kang's win is quite a milestone win for South Korean literature and Asian literature as a whole. She's the first Asian female to win the Nobel Prize and the second Korean ever to win the Nobel Prize after Kim Dae-jung in 2000.
Which he got for the Peace Award.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's, as I said, it's a phenomenal result for South Korean literature. It surges Korean fiction and Korean linguistic strength across the world.
What I found most amusing about this entire incident was when all of these conservative politicians started to congratulate Kang for her award, even though that she has written about topics that a lot of conservatives, whether we talk about politicians or their voters, are topics that they really hate.
I think the one thing that we have to remember that Kang was a person that was blacklisted
During the Park Geun-hye administration.
And Kang was not alone in that list.
Bong Joon-ho was another one.
Joon-ho, the
director of Parasite.
The Squid Game director was also Hwang Dong-hyuk. He was also blacklisted.
I didn't know that he was blacklisted too.
Yeah, he was. And it's quite a reflection on South Korean society's undertaking of its own historical facts. And also Kang as an author who directly took this history head on. I think it's a reflection of the best of South Korean society.
You know, considering how many of these people who have been blacklisted for one reason or another eventually get all of this kind of international recognition, you would think that someone somewhere might be thinking really hard about their life choices. But yeah, so this is a really big deal. As you said, this is the second time a Korean citizen has been awarded a Nobel Prize, although obviously not in the same category, but yes. And also, based on this Nobel Prize in Literature, you just wrote a brilliant analysis about the role that translators play in translating Korean works of literature into all these other languages like English or Spanish.
Yeah, so there truly are unsung heroes of the South Korean craft of literature. I think that, translators, the role that they play, the translators that I spoke to, they are de facto agents for South Korean literature, introducing South Korean literature into the international scene, translating it, getting the international support, the financial support that they need for publishing in separate countries. And I think that translators, their financial support from the South Korean government and also South Korean institutions is still lacking.
All right. Excellent and well put. Now, if you want to read more about what Joon Ha just wrote, in that case, please subscribe. All right, let's move on to the next topic, and we're going to move on to foreign policy now. President Yoon met with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in Laos last week. Now, could you walk us through that? What exactly happened in Laos?
So South Korean President Yoon and Ishiba, they met in Laos, as you just said, for the ASEAN summit on the sidelines. And it was quite a cordial meeting. There was
It was a nice get-to-know-you sort of meeting, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was the first time that they met. And, Yoon would want to continue what he had with Kishida. Ishiba has also voiced in his first policy speech before the ASEAN summit that he wanted to continue Kishida's kind of goals with South Korea.
And there might be room for actual rapprochement, actual personal relations between Yoon and Ishiba, because Ishiba has been more moderate, at least in his rhetoric, as far as his past comments about South Korea-Japan relations.
Sure. He's been much more moderate in terms of looking at South Korean Japanese ties, especially related to historical grievances, compared to other factions of the LDP. However,
that's the Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party in Japan.
However, his most recent, not visit, but he just offered a ritual offering to the Yasukuni Shrine.
The Yasukuni Shrine being a very controversial shrine because among the many people who had whose remains are in the Yasukuni Shrine, and all of these people are people who had died fighting with Japan. Among all those people, there are also Class A war criminals who were tried and found guilty of human rights violations and war crimes during the Second World War.
Absolutely, and this Ishiba has never visited the Yasukuni Shrine or even offered these ritual offerings to the shrine throughout his political career, but this is the first time that he has done so as a prime minister. It kind of reflects that he's playing both sides, especially to the Japanese public, factions of the LDP, his own cabinet ministers, and also at the same time he can't really play both sides with Seoul as well, especially he's the Japanese prime minister.
Well put. He has all politics local. He has his own people that he has to deal with, but at the same time, he doesn't want to upset Seoul or Beijing all that much. So he is playing the game, as you just said, so that makes a lot of sense. But of course, even though it's playing the game, South Korea has also played the game too. The Foreign Ministry just released a statement saying that it regrets Ishiba's offering to the Yasukuni Shrine. But regardless of that, what's been going on recently, just yesterday, I believe, there was a vice ministerial meeting between South Korea and Japan. And so there was a very long joint statement that was released talking about cooperation, military cooperation to protect themselves from North Korean aggression. There was also mentions about trade. And so, yes, this is a convoluted and oftentimes very boring diplomatic dance that we've all seen many, many times play out. But at the same time, despite this dance, which is for some reason necessary, it might not actually have any significant impact improving ties between Seoul and Tokyo for the time being, at least.
No, you're absolutely right. Tokyo and Seoul and Washington, they all have a primary goal, which is protecting their countries against, security woes in the region. So I don't think that this will go beyond South Korea voicing deep regret and Japan not replying to that deep regret. All right, so moving on, John, U.S. President Donald Trump.
Former U.S. president. He's not the president yet.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump, he stated on Tuesday that South Korea would be paying $10 billion annually for the stationing of U.S. troops on the peninsula if he were still in office. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, remember how I just said a second ago that there's this dance of diplomacy between South Korea and Japan, this being very routine and boring? Well, Trump is the opposite of that. There's nothing routine about whatever he says or does. Now, you just rightfully pointed out, yes, during an interview with, I believe it was Bloomberg, Donald Trump said that if he were still president, South Korea would be paying $10 billion per year for the stationing of U.S. troops in South Korea. Now, when Trump was president the last time around, there were many news reports at the time that suggested that Trump was demanding that South Korea would pay $5 billion per year. So obviously this is twice as much as what Trump was demanding back then. But right now, there's a lot of nonsense that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. For instance, he keeps saying that there are 40,000 U.S. troops stationed in Korea. It's not 40,000, it's 28,500. He says that South Korea is completely taking advantage of the U.S., never mind that South Korea paid for the entire of Camp Humphreys, or at least the vast majority of it.
Sure.
And there's also the fact that Donald Trump keeps liking to say that South Korea is a money machine, that South Korea is a very wealthy country that's taking advantage of of the United States. And part of it is because it's a campaign season. There's less than 3 weeks left before the U.S. elections. But part of it is also this is something that he genuinely believes. This has been something that he's been saying for years, even before he became president the first time around. And so he's making all of these statements right now, and it's causing a lot of people to worry because right now, South Korea and the U.S. just had their special measures agreements. That's a defense sharing costs negotiations, and it concluded earlier this month. And when it concluded, South Korea and the U.S. agreed that South Korea would be paying $1.14 billion per year for the stationing of U.S. troops.
It's very different to $10 billion.
That's 10 times more than what South Korea is paying right now. And so we have to take into consideration what happens if 3 weeks later it's announced that Trump has won and he's become president again. This is going to be a nightmare scenario for South Korea because Trump is going to demand a renegotiation of the SMA negotiations, and he's going to want South Korea to pay much more. He's probably going to threaten to withdraw U.S. troops from South Korea. And over the past 2.5 years, President Yoon Suk-yeol has put all of his chips into improving ties with the U.S. He went to meet with President Joe Biden numerous times. He has sided with the U.S. when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act. And under this improved relations, a lot of South Korean corporations like Samsung, LG, SK, Hyundai, they've all poured in billions of dollars to invest in their plants and facilities in the U.S. But if all of a sudden Trump comes into office in November, or in January rather, there could be a 180 turn. And this will put Yoon in a very tight spot. He would have spent 2.5 years trying to improve relations with a country that eventually turned around to say South Korea is the enemy, a word that Trump has used to describe South Korea. To be fair, Trump has said South Korea may be an ally, but when it comes to trade, South Korea is a quote-unquote enemy. And so this is going to be a nightmare scenario. The South Korean government, I'm sure, within closed doors, are having a panic mode right now and are talking about nothing but Trump.
Sure.
But at least the way that the structures are going, the way the gears have been set, it's very unclear as to how South Korea can try to mitigate any kinds of a Trump risk if he returns to office.
Korea Pro, your definitive business intelligence resource for all things South Korea. Subscribe to our daily executive briefing on the most pressing issue of the day and a summary of key Korean and international news. Benefit from our analysts' original perspective on South Korea's economy, politics, security and society. The Monday Week Ahead newsletter helps you stay ahead of the curve for upcoming business and political events. Need to catch up? Our weekly podcast recaps recent developments. Trusted by leading corporations, government agencies and research institutions, Korea Pro delivers essential business intelligence daily. Stay ahead in South Korea's rapidly evolving environment. Visit koreapro.org/podcast. Korea Pro, never be sidelined again.
Next, week ahead, there is probably going to be a meeting between South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Han Dong-un, who is the leader of the ruling People Power Party. Now, these two people's relationships have been strained over the past few months because of Han's insistence on siding with the opposition party to investigate the First Lady. In fact, Han also just said today that the First Lady should disavow any sorts of involvement in state affairs or even to make any kinds of speeches, I believe, about politics. Or, quite frankly, I think Han really wants the First Lady to just stay home and not say anything publicly. And so this has caused a lot of strain between Yoon and Han. But right now, Han has been boosted a little bit, and that's because of yesterday's by-election results. Now, if you look at the by-election results, there wasn't that much of a significant win for the ruling party. The Democratic Party won in their strongholds, and the People Power Party won in their strongholds. But the fact that the People Power Party won in their strongholds was considered a victory. This is how bad things have become for the People Power Party. But regardless, it's still considered a quote-unquote win, and Han has been boosted a bit, and so he has a bit more leverage to talk to Yoon and make some more demands, I believe. And so this will probably take place in the next few days, and we will put this in a newsletter in the week ahead newsletter for you, and everything that's going to come up next week as well. And this will be sent to your email inboxes by 2 p.m. on Monday. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Okay, and that's a wrap for this week. Have a good weekend, everyone.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
And I'm John Lay. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Great Pro Podcast.